Now we talk about the man who really was born, on the 8th, and that is Sir Denis Lasdun, the brutalist British architect who was not brutal, though. That's why he received the title, the ennobling title of Sir Denis Lasdun. So let's talk about him from the beginning. Yes, Sir Denis Lasdun, 1914-2001, an important British architect. As you can see, Sir Denis Lasdun was born on September 8th, 1914, and died in January 2001, was an eminent English architect, the son of Nathan Lasdun and Julie. Probably his best known work is the Royal National Theatre on London's south bank of the Thames, which is a Grade II listed building and one of the most notable examples of brutalist design in the United Kingdom. I kept saying that, what we call brutalist architecture often behind the appearance hides a sensitive soul. And so we shouldn't be alarmed when we see these words, brutalist. Brutalist is not necessarily brutal. And there is a certain poetry of, of the brutalist movement, which employed, unfortunately, a lot of concrete, and concrete was not at that time considered pollutant. Now we know that it pollutes a lot, concrete. But I like the architectonic poetry of exposed concrete. Denis Lasdun studied where else? At the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London, the school that produced and produces and probably will continue to produce geniuses in architecture, and was a junior in the practice of Wells codes, like other modernist architects, including Sir Basil Spence and Peter and Alison Smithson. Lasdun was much influenced by Le Corbusier and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, but there was a gentler, more classical influence too from the likes of Nicholas Hawksmoor. Lasdun was elected a Royal Academician on the 29th of May, 1991. This was the man. And again, an important British architect, Sir Denis Lasdun. Here is another picture of him. He does look like a gentleman, and I would say probably a rather kind man. And the kindness seems to be even more apparent on this picture. So, was he? In what way was he a brutalist architect? I mean, if all brutalist architecture would be born from people looking like Denis Lasdun in this picture, I would welcome them. Anyway, Hallfield Primary School, Paddington, London, 1952. We see already, I mean, this was an architecture a few years after the end of the Second World War, and we see a certain playfulness here that I wish more schools would have, because schools are for children, and pupils, children, they are supposed to have a playful environment. And architecture can contribute to this, instead of being a stiff environment where the students would become uneasy, not to say anxious. Early 50s, Sir Denis Lasdun, a school in Great Britain. Killing House, well, sorry for the pronunciation. K-E-E, and not K-I-L-L-I-N-G. Grade II listed the first example of post-war council housing to gain this distinction. I like these buildings. I mean, it's called house, but it's actually an apartment building, a block of flats. And it has a very fresh modernity. Killing House. Look at this. I mean, this was built when? Well, it doesn't say here, but I guess the 50s, early 60s. And of course, it's the building in the background, the tall building. I think it's an example of a block of flats which still has freshness and vigor and something to say, so to speak, architecturally. If we build something like this today, I think it would be more than okay. I hope I have the plans here. Let's see. Yeah, look at the plans. Very interesting, you know, with the access into the apartments from exterior corridors, which always are very convenient because they create the opportunity for the apartments to have cross ventilation or double orientation. It's a very, you know, honest, clear organization of the functions and sculptural. So you have multiplicity in unity. You have actually a block of flats which is composed of 4 distinct units, and thus the image is rather sculptural. A good idea. There is some loss of energy here, yes. In the age of sustainability, we should think about this because, you know, the apartments have lots of exterior walls. But again, at the time when it was built, there wasn't a great concern with such matters. I personally like these exterior corridors which give access to the apartments because these are also like collective balconies where you can meet your neighbors. You can smoke a cigarette in case you still smoke with your neighbor. You can discuss and so on. It's a place, even if it's narrow, it's a place for social interaction. The Killing House, again, rather, well, I almost felt like saying a funny name, but killing doesn't sound too funny, does it? Although the spelling is different. And there we see a nice, you know, armchair by Charles Eames. And what can we say? You know, again, if this building was built today, we would applaud it. We would appreciate it very much. Well, it was built at least 60, 70 years ago by Sir Denis Lasdun. Another so-called house, another block of flats by, you see, 1957. That is almost 70 years ago, and done in the same spirit like the previous building. And this kind of architecture, which employs exterior corridors to access the apartments, is very easy to work with it because the functioning of the apartments themselves can be solved you know, very easily, and also the aesthetical impression, the sculpturalness that allows this kind of you know, distribution of circulations is a positive thing, I would say. Again, you know, it's an apartment building, but it's different because of the, in a way, it's because of this interstitial space, which is the exterior circulation, which gives access to the duplexes because that's what they are. And as you can see, the duplex has the functions organized very, very well and with very little circulation within. You know, just a little corridor, which also benefits from light and ventilation from the exterior corridor, large living room, a larger kitchen than in most of the villas built by Rudolf Olgiati. And let's see if we have the well, the second floor with the bedrooms. But you can imagine, you know, probably 2 or 3 bedrooms, maybe 2 bedrooms and the bathroom at the top above. Yeah, I think Dennis Lasdun is teaching us something about blocks of flats from the 1950s. Nothing very ambitious or, revolutionary. And yet, I think it's an architecture which does deserve recognition and appreciation. And it's very easy to orient yourself, within and without in relation with this building. You understand immediately where the staircase is, where how the accesses happen to the apartments and so on. You see, you take the staircase or the you know the what is called in our country the lift, and then the exterior corridors um, direct you towards the entrance, and then you have the second floor because they are duplexes, and then another corridor and so on. Massive, brutal is now and then, expressive, sculptural. Well, this is the title, I mean, the cover of a book, because the brutalism did have a comeback a few years ago. I saw in Vienna, there was everywhere a book called SOS Brutalismus. Yes, because like for example, here is a church built by a sculptor in Vienna, in Austria, a very expressive church indeed. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, people got tired at one point of minimalism, and they wanted expression and vigor and even sincerity. I'm not saying necessarily that minimalists didn't have sincerity, but sometimes it was contrived, it was forced, it was pedantic. So the the expressiveness of what is called now brutalism was something refreshing. Here again, raw concrete, the beauty of brutalism. Uh, I read that actually Zaha Hadid, her goal was to create an architecture that was raw, earthy, and vital. In my opinion, she didn't arrive at that architecture. Maybe some architecture by Zaha Hadid has a certain level of vitality, but it was never really raw. Maybe at the very beginning there was a certain rawness, but later it became rather slick, and it was not earthy. No, we cannot say that the architecture of Zaha Hadid is an earthy architecture. This brutal world is not brutal. This is, I love this structure by Herzog and de Meuron built in China. The so-called reading room, all in exposed concrete. Because the labyrinth is present there, the viscerality of life itself and architecture are there. You have to figure out by yourself what to do with this structure, how to use it, if you are to use it. But people are very enticed and incited by it, so they climb through it, and it's something to discover. It's not brutal, really. I don't know why it's called This Brutal World. To me, it doesn't look like a brutal world, but it's a catchy title, I guess. Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I mean, this structure by Herzog and de Meuron in Jinhua Architecture Park in China. Here it is, with two Chinese men still laboring around it. I like this work very much by Herzog and de Meuron. And as you can see, people even risk their lives in order to arrive somewhere at a certain level within this structure. The kid is also, because there is always a child within us that wants to discover things and experiment things, even those things that are not comfortable to experiment. Like here, of course, Ernest Neufert would have trembled because here everything he stood for is betrayed. But life itself is like this. If everything was, predetermined and, logistically, resolved and so on, life would become very boring. It's more interesting like this. A little bit of danger, no? After all, didn't Friedrich Nietzsche say live dangerously? Well, that man, he is living dangerously to an extent. Now, if he didn't drink, he didn't live. He doesn't live too dangerously. Anyway, I like this work by Herzog and de Meuron. Bravo to them. I guess I read something, but I forgot. They proposed something earlier before they built this for the same area. And well, they ended up building this thing. You'll say, what's the relationship with Sir Denis Lasdun? Well, the relationship is that this is considered a brutalist work, and so are some works by Sir Denis Lasdun. I show brutalists today as opposed to brutalism in the 50s and 60s. I remember, I don't know if it is the logo or the motto, or I don't know how to call it, of SciArc in Los Angeles. To hell with regulations, we are going for the unknown. Well, in a way, that's what we look at here. To hell with regulations, we are going for the unknown. This building is inviting you to explore the unknown. You don't know what to expect when you enter this structure. You see, SOS Brutalism, a global survey. This is in English, but the German version was called SOS Brutalismus. It's the same book, one in English, one in German. Another work by Denis Lasdun, 1959-1963, the Fitzwilliam College in Cambridge. Okay, this is maybe a little bit predictable, but still rather, fresh and vigorous. Its modernity. Again, as I said, maybe a little bit predictable because this stepping of the various floors with the terraces is a little bit predictable, but it's still an architecture of honesty and vigor. Yes. Well, geometrical vigor, maybe too geometrical. Sir Denis Lasdun. But again, you have to see that to consider that this was built almost 70 years ago. A lot of concrete. I wouldn't call it brutalism necessarily. It's actually well built, and the concrete. Okay, it's not polished like Tadao Ando does with his concrete, but it's not brutal now. And it's Cambridge. The Royal College of Physicians, also Denis Lasdun in London, 1960, 1964. I personally like this historicist statue here, in the background, having the building by Denis Lasdun. If we can have this kind of juxtapositions, these various layers. Also, it's not so much of, well, I guess it's also about styles or aesthetical styles or artistic styles, but it's also about layers of time, because I'm sure this was not done at the time when the building was built. It's from a different time. So you have nature, you have a different time, then you have the building by Sir Denis Lasdun, Then we have these urban lights, which themselves are from a different time. So, you know, it's about tolerance and negotiation between various periods of time coming together. And I think they should not be avoided. On the other hand, we shouldn't mimic something that was built a long time ago. No, we should assert our time, and that's what Sir Denis Lasdun did. He built his building as he felt like it in the 50s, 60s, in the 60s in this case. I'm not very sure how necessary these rather thin square columns are, structurally speaking, but I guess for aesthetical reasons, he wanted to emphasize something here, perhaps. Color, so not just whiteness, that's good. I don't know if this rendering belonged to his office, maybe it did. The core buildings of the University of East Anglia, Norwich, 1962-1968. Well, we saw something similar now before. Sometimes I get confused because I'm not sure. Is it the same building or there are two very similar buildings built in two different locations? Here the passage of time is more obvious, but refurbishing them would erase that. As we can see in this picture, a lot of glass though. Then the idealism of those years, 60s, early 70s, rock and roll, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, so on. You know, there was something in that time which still attracts me a lot. But the architecture is not a contorted architecture like we saw in the case of Rudolf Olgiati. No, this is an architecture with a certain clarity. And personally, I think for particularly, but not only for a public building like this one, is very appropriate. The Charles Wilson building at the University of Leicester, Sir Denis Lasdun again. The Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, Institute of Education, and the Library of the School of Oriental and African Studies, Bloomsbury. A powerful building with unexpected sculpturalness at the top, as you can see. An urban building, as opposed to some of the earlier buildings that we looked at, which were, spread over, generous landscapes. Here we see an urban building, but with a distinct personality and presence because of what's happening on the top floor. So it's an architecture of contrasts. And I think contrasts benefit very often architecture and art and almost anything, contrasts. Even on a plate, if you eat something and you have something green, let's say some salad, and then some redness, green and red being opposite colors, that plate looks more appetizing because of the tension between the green and the red. Here we see the tension between the long, prism, horizontal prism with all those windows, and then at the top and at the bottom, some massive concrete elements. So again and again, sculpturalness is adding something to architecture. It makes the building attractive and intriguing. Maybe sometimes, like in this case, maybe that stair is a little bit too predictable and too willful, but it has its own force. Now we arrive at his best known work, the Royal National Theatre of London, in South Bank, London, 1967-1976. This is a very important work, and he was the author. The Royal National Theatre of London, South Bank, London. And here it is, with some more recent interventions, that yellow there with a figuration on the, I hope I have other pictures. It is a work with some urban drama, and it's a public building of large dimensions. It's a theater in London, and I think the public function of the building is emphasized by the not just by the dimensions of the work, but also the choice of materials. It's not a building that impresses you through little small details. It impresses you with its general allure, general composition, so to speak, crystallized as it is. I think it's a good building. And look at these diagonals of concrete, which are enticing, which are provocative, and that's where the entrance is. So, being a theater is I would say, appropriate to have some drama in the building itself. It's a giant building, it's a major structure within London. Sir Denis Lasdun, the National Theatre. This is not any theatre. It's the National Theatre in London. Concrete, concrete, and concrete again. Well, it's true, this concrete block of large dimensions does seem to need something. That's why we saw in an earlier picture that those characters on a yellow background. We are approaching the end of the presentation. So the National Theatre of London, Sir Denis Lasdun. Even if concrete is a conglomerate, as Frank Lloyd Wright said, it is preferable, in my opinion, to have a surface of exposed concrete than a white or painted white surface, because concrete still has some texture, a certain tactility. Here we see the red thing here is not by Sir Denis Lasdun. This was added later. I don't remember the name of the architect. Maybe it will be shown in a few moments. But I like the dialectics between the building by Sir Dennis Lasdun and the red exposed concrete structure by this other architect. Again, the corner of the of the National Theatre of Dennis Lasdun, which is, I think, to be appreciated for its sculpturalness. Yes, this was the architect who built the red addition, the Howard Tompkins, the shed. It's called the Shed in London, and here it is. So this is by this architect, Howard Tompkins, and the one on the right is by Sir Dennis Lasdun, the architect whose birthday we celebrate today. I think this architect did a good job here, bringing in a contrast to the building and now they enhance each other. So this redness maybe was even necessary there. I don't know what its function is of the shed, maybe something related to the theater, but aesthetically, I think it works well. And we see in the background the dome of St. Paul Cathedral by Sir Christopher Wren, who some think was the best British architect ever, although he never studied architecture. He was a physicist, but anyway. So theater in the foreground and God in the background. St. Paul Cathedral by Sir Christopher Wren. Thank you. And happy birthday, Sir Dennis Lasdun.